You're listening to the Ballet Piano Podcast, lifting the lid on dance accompaniment.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, hello and welcome back to this episode of the Ballet Piano Podcast. My name is Chris Hobson, and on location with me in Covent Garden is Akiko Hobson.
Hello.
Matthew Gregory.
Hello, listeners.
And this week we are in conversation with music director of the Australian Ballet. It's Jonathan Lowe, or Johnny Lowe, or J Lowe, as we've just been discussing. Hello.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Yeah, all good. This is actually my last full day in the UK before going back to Australia via Zurich. So we saved the best till last.
Well, we got you on the right day then, just before you jetted off.
Right, before you jet off, let's go back to the beginning a little bit. Not 1987 beginnings, not literally the creation of you.
You outed me straight away.
So, were you always interested in music as a youngster? Was music in your family, or was something that you found through other means? Because my family isn't musical at all, and it just so happened that I enjoyed playing the piano and was musical. Did you come from a musical family?
Absolutely not.
Wow.
I think it can be summarized in when I remember this. We were listening to. I think it was Romeo and Juliet, the Tchaikovsky, not the Prokofiev. And they were listening to the big, the sort of allegro section, the fast bit. And they had absolutely no idea. They were just like, what is this noise? and you just think, yeah. But how I got into it, well, like a lot of, I need to be very careful how I say this, but I like a lot of family who are aspirational. They very much go, you need to do music.
Yeah,
it's part of your adding value to yourself and that sort of thing. So I was shoved into playing piano when I was 3.
Why are you looking at me, Matt?
Kiko.
Laughter or recognition there. I think.
Your son plays the piano.
Yeah.
To enrich his life.
And the amount of arguments I refereed whilst he was having his grade 5 practice.
I mean, every Asian family has tiger mom. Let's phrase it that way. Yeah?
I think there's no small element of that, but it was put in a very sort of business way to say, well, if you play this and you play this, if you get this grade and that grade, that literally adds that many points to whatever the equivalent of UCAS is where I was growing up.
Absolutely.
Well, there you go. I'm talking to the expert here. And so piano was the first thing. And I remember coming out of the first lesson, the piano teacher said to my mother, well, thanks for taking your son to this first lesson. And it was lovely meeting him, but teaching him is like teaching a lump of rice. There is just nothing coming back the other way.
God.
So, start of a musical career, I suppose.
That's a great start.
Yes, and that's sort of, but I think the moment that I really thought, I want to do music was when I realized that I wanted to be a conductor. I came into it via many instruments. I did the piano, I did French horn. I actually took up the organ in order to conduct.
Right.
It's a boring story. But I think realizing that I would like to conduct was quite early on. I was in my teenage years in Hong Kong, where I grew up before I moved to the UK. And classical music is cool. Unlike here, when you feel like you have to sell it to young people all the time. Yeah. Classical music in Hong Kong, I don't know whether it's the case in all of Asia in general, but it's very much just a case of classical music equals something Western and therefore something really brilliant and you must do as a youngster. So myself and a lot of friends, we really invested ourselves in it. Every Saturday, it wasn't going to the club, it wasn't going drinking, it was going to see a concert. And at school, joining the school orchestra, we were very lucky that I was at a school where the school orchestra, you can look it up on YouTube. It's like, close your eyes and it's like a professional orchestra. Open your eyes, like this slightly creepy, everybody exactly the same part of the bow, drilled to the high heavens sort of thing. And I think it was from there that I from orchestral, going to orchestral concerts, playing an orchestra, thinking, I want to conduct. And I don't know why, but it was just a thing, I suppose, the slightly intangible feeling of having that connection with the conductor. We had a fantastic conductor at school. He's actually currently the headmaster of the school. So he's done very well getting out of the dance ice. And thinking, how does he do this? How does he get this reaction from everyone without saying anything at all? And also, I remember being a conductor looked quite pretty.
Glamorous.
Well, no, it's the elegance of the gesture, because he was a very elegant conductor, and I think in many ways that's ended up what I looked for in myself and in other colleagues too. Thinking what makes a good conducting technique is something that is effective in communication, but also elegance in delivery, I suppose.
I haven't heard
Yeah.
a conductor's position summed up so well for a long time. I mean, especially that would just sidetrack slightly, because sometimes working with a touring ballet company or something like that, or, if you're a freelance conductor, you're here, there and everywhere. I've worked with some conductors in the past who, they can deliver a fine performance from the audience perspective, but it's literally just somebody putting their hands into the position and it's metronomic and it's not interesting. There's almost, very little engagement between the players and the conductor. And I always feel that, it might have been absolutely perfect for the dancers, but it always felt sort of, I don't know, limp, and, it was never musically fulfilling in those performances.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's interesting you mentioned touring, because I think there's a lot of connotations with that. You think touring, you think a specific kind of working conditions, repetition probably, and therefore whether those things have then ended up with something that is less than ideal artistically. But I think it's precisely because of those things that as the conductor, you need to work so much harder to convince the orchestra, yes, I know you're playing this for the 40th time in the last 3 weeks, but this is why we do it. And trying to remember that, something special.
I mean, like you were music director at Northern Ballet. I've gone completely off topic here. I was going to go in chronological order. But, like if you're onto your 40th or 50th performance of, be it the Nutcracker or whatever ballet you're on tour with, the orchestra are a bit bored by it, or can be a bit bored by it. And it's actually quite often they'll look to the conductor to bring a little bit of fire into that performance, or just something different. How are you going to create something that's musically correct but still engaging for everybody, isn't it?
I actually see that as an opportunity, because when you have an orchestra that's played it so many times, they're so familiar with it. They are just looking up, looking around, looking for that something. And that's great, because then you can make so many things happen in the moment. Things that you didn't even think were musically possible or valid. And you go, oh, I've never tried it before. Or on the other hand, I've also done things where you go, I'm never doing that again.
Yeah, that fell on its ass.
It's like, that diminuendo was stupid. Or like, I've done, in Nutcracker, actually, you mentioned the Nutcracker, that it's in the flower waltz, when that da, 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 come back so many times. I just play with the dynamics every time. And I remember there was one time that it was really noticed by the audience, and somebody said, it was like, why did you do that diminuendo? I was just like, it was ridiculous. And I got so much flack for it. But then I turned around and just said to him, like, but you listen.
Yeah.
And it's not just that again, it's something different. And it has to be, particularly in ballet. And as you know, I'm talking to some of the finest people who work in ballet. You need to...
That's very kind. Your standards must be very low.
It is in the name. But it's the fact that they need you to be different too. Otherwise, they get robotic, we get robotic, then what's the point? We
exactly.
just
and a dancer
and
doesn't perform, it's never the same every day. It's never the same. We've said this hundreds of times. It's never the same. What's the correct tempo for a Monday isn't the correct tempo for a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday matinee or Thursday. Every day, everything is always slightly different.
Absolutely. And in addition to that, particularly when it comes to a show, it's so easy for us to think of tempo in relation to the steps, but also it's got to be tempo in relation to the drama and to the story and how they're acting in the moment. What if they are just holding on to that snog for longer tonight?
Yes.
You've got to give them that moment.
There's a lot of snogging in those Northern Ballet productions.
On stage? Oh, no.
Matt, don't tell that story about me.
Oh, go on.
Do it off the mic. When Akiko goes back to work, we can tell you that one. She doesn't know
Kiko
that.
knows it.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, let's move on from that. So you studied music, you read music at Oxford. So presumably you came over to the UK, studied at Oxford, and then you went up to the Royal Northern to sort of develop your conducting studies and understanding. Was it from Northern then that Royal Northern College of Music, you came down to the Opera House for the Jet Parker?
So Oxford was almost like an accident, and I feel very lucky and privileged to be able to say
It was a happy
that.
accident.
It was a happy accident. And actually, because when I came over to the UK, together with my sister and my mother, it was, trying to find a different life. Because growing up in Hong Kong, every class, there was about 35 kids and 6 classes per year, hundreds of school. Like it's really hard to stand out. So I think an opportunity came for us to come over and to try a different new life. But at that point, I already made up my mind that I want to do conducting. But there's no undergraduate studies for conducting. And so when I was at the school that I was in, I was at Bedford, up the road. And they said, well, if you get an organ scholarship, then you get to conduct the choir all the time. And that may be an opportunity for you to get podium time.
Okay. Because I did wonder how, like, the appointment for the music director of the Manchester Chamber Choir and things, I did wonder how that came about. So that's interesting. I didn't know that.
It was interesting because, so there were many things with that one statement that my head of music made. Get an organ scholarship. Okay, fine. I don't play the organ. I didn't play the organ. Some would argue that I still don't play the organ. And I knew nothing about the Anglican church music repertoire.
Yeah.
So then he was like, well, you can learn. You've got 6 months, join the choir. And it was life-changing because it opened me to a body of repertoire that I didn't know before and I now absolutely adore. And it's the one part of my career that I sort of had to give up a little bit when I left the chamber choir.
Yeah.
Because ballet also took over. It has a habit of taking up a lot of time, as you know. But also in that time, learning that repertoire also opened me up to a whole new group of friendships. And I think coming from a different country, that was really important and really eye-opening. Because music, yes, so we joke about it, about the tiger parents and how it adds value and stuff. But my parents generally also thought music was a vehicle to make friends and to do it with other people. And to do it with people outside of my usual comfort zone of playing the French horn into the choir, it was like a whole different world. Opened me to, yes, a new group of people, a sort of new kind of humor. The Anglican church music humor is quite different to, the orchestral type. So I think I really credit that with opening my life up to actually what is a real English way of living. Because before that, it was quite hybrid between coming from Hong Kong and holding on to that part of the culture. But you can't help but feel closer to the Britishness, I guess, when you're walking into cathedrals and going all around the country singing even songs at different towns all the time. And so, as you say, after that, it was, I've got my podium time at university. Oxford also gave me the opportunity to do a lot. To put on your own things. So in my second year, I remember distinctly that every night of the week I'd be conducting something. So either a rehearsal or even song or an ad hoc gig somewhere. We also put on our own operas. We did all the Beethoven symphonies in a weekend. Wow. At the college chapel, which made me the least popular person possibly in the country, particularly on the Sunday morning. Everybody was hungover and we're like hammering out Beethoven's 3 in the chapel. It was awful. So after that, it was like, okay, you go and study at the music conservatoire. And this is, I find, a really interesting part of musicians' development, because you go to conservatoires and people they sell you this dream of you're going to come to the conservatoire and you're going to make it. Yeah. And for conductors, it's like, but you're not all going to conduct at the Berlin Phil, just in the same way that in the piano world, you're not all going to play the complete Rachmaninoff concerto with the Berlin Phil. And so afterwards, you do this sort of, okay, so what am I going to do? You go and do your competitions and stuff. And then I fell into ballet. That was the happy accident.
It's funny how everybody falls into, or a lot of people fall into ballet, isn't it? Because I started, it was like very, very briefly, because I was at Chet's and I was offered to go to Royal Northern a year early. And I was like, well, I've been at Chet's since I was 10 or something. So I was like, I need a break. I need 6 months or a year off. So I took that time off and I had no cash. Yeah. And I found myself in a jazz gig. And the next thing, somebody came and said, oh, we need a contemporary pianist for this school, Northern School of Contemporary Dancing, Leeds. 15 quid an hour back in 2003, good money. Do you want to do it? I was like, well, I've got nothing else to do with my life. Yeah, so I took a gap year, and then now 21 years later, I'm still on this fictitious gap year because
hopefully
I just
not on £15 an hour.
£13 now. It's a financial crisis. But yeah, it's funny how it just grabs you, didn't it? Because I knew nothing about the dance world or the ballet world before I started accompanying in it.
I find it fascinating, just on that one story, how many things that actually comes out from that just one story. So it's the idea that people fall into it all the time and go, but why? But there is no, as far as I know, there's no formal conservatoire level training that is full-time for people to work as a musician in ballet. And it's astonishing considering that in the UK alone, there's something like close to 500 performances every year that requires a conductor who knows what they're doing in ballet to do the job properly. And I can't even imagine the number of hours of ballet classes and the equivalent amount of money that one could potentially earn if you can just have the skills to do it. But no one does it at conservatoire level. But secondly, the idea why so many people fall into it is because ballet also has a habit of just going, oh, you can play jazz, you'll do.
Yeah. And that's what it was. You can improvise, you can hold a groove, go for it.
And actually, I believe that is not okay. We should all hold higher standards for what lets people into the ballet world. And through that, I think people will then go, oh yeah, we in order to be a ballet pianist, you need this, and that skills. And you look and you go, oh, we need to invest the time into training this.
Because just with a conductor, it's such a multifaceted role, especially if you're a company pianist. Like you say, you've got to play the class work, you've got to play the vast amounts of repertoire, and quite often you'll be in the pit as well. And then with some companies like BRB, Northern EMB, you're on tour as
Absolutely.
well. It's vast, and you're playing things, from Minkus straight the way through to 21st century stuff, which I call hitty music. Stuff that was composed last year. The breadth of knowledge and musicality that you've got to have to work in this job, it's absolutely astounding.
It's incredible. And I say to people who are not necessarily familiar with the ballet world, and they go, oh yeah, being a ballet musician. I say to them, being a ballet pianist, and I'm not saying this because of present company, but being a ballet pianist is possibly the single most difficult and most multifaceted job you can have as a professional musician.
Yeah.
Because as you say, you have to do all those things, but you're playing the pit, but you're not just playing the piano part in Petrushka. You're playing, I don't know, Rubies. You're playing Stravinsky piano concerto. You're playing Rhapsody on the theme of Paganini, which is what's happening across the road right now. And you're doing that 10 shows, 20 shows, and you have to maintain that same high standard, as well as getting up in the morning and then do an hour and a half of ballet class. And you go, is that pirouette exercise still going on?
I know. I don't know if you agree with this. I claim that ballet class is the only job that you can go into as a musician and you don't know what you're going to be asked to play sometimes until 3 seconds before you start playing.
Yes, sometimes you still don't know when they turn around and say, Anne.
I know, and you're looking at the first group and you're going, holy moly, is this, am I going to hope that this is right? Chuck a dart, throw a six to start and hope it's correct.
Yeah, absolutely. And even to an extent that when it comes to rehearsals, I mean, I'm sure you've all been in those principal rehearsals when, they go, okay, I'm going to go into the rehearsals and I know it's going to be these pas de deux, it's going to be these solos. And then they go, oh yeah, can we actually just hear from the beginning?
My gosh, yes.
So we know the entrances and exits and all that. And you go, okay, I've got to be ready to do this.
That happened to me when I used to work at EMB school, because I can say it now because I don't work there. And one of the ballet mistresses from EMB company came to work with the third years. They were doing the Swans. And he said, okay, well, and they said, what are you doing? Oh, bits from the fourth act. And he said, okay, right, we're going to go from the top of the fourth act and we're going to play all the way through. Oh, God, I haven't done this for 7 years.
Ah, yes. And the famous entrance of da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Oh, yeah. And I was like, God, my fingers can still do it. I didn't think they could anymore.
But I don't want to make this sound like a grudge on our ballet colleagues on the other side, because it's they're absolutely right and within their rights to ask of this. But I think it's a question of appreciating that actually for the pianist when they come in to suddenly be thrown into it and still do a brilliant job like you've just described it's an incredible feat. And we have to invest the time and the money to look after these artists who are just as equal as the people dancing.
And I always say as well that the dancers can mark what they're doing, but the pianist never marks the music.
No.
Because they need to hear what they're going to hear, even if they're just marking it, even in class and rehearsal, wherever. So you are performing all the time.
Yes.
At full level.
Yeah, and those full chords that you've got to play, and when the principals come on and go, oh my God, this is my 2 seconds of glory. And the pianist has literally just done all of Sleeping Beauty. Actually, Nutcracker is another one to use that classic example with the main principals only coming on at the very last minute. I think, and this is just it. It's just appreciating that both sides work really hard outside of the actual hours that you see them doing something.
And I think though that's a lot more recognised now by both sides than it used to be. Sort of like going back 20, 30, and if we've all got, older colleagues who've been in the game for 40, 50 years. And you think about, some of the horror stories, which I'm sure have been slightly embellished over the years, but the communication and the understanding, I think, between the two sides, between the music and the dance has got better.
Definitely.
Certainly in my, time in the world.
Yeah, I think so. And I think certainly the drive towards better communications between professional artists, musicians, altogether, actually across the board, has really given rise to that. But also, I think it takes, in fact, what we're doing now is a classic example. It takes people who invest their time so that you bring ballet music, ballet piano, you make a podcast out of it, and it's literally in the title, to really hammer home the fact that dance and music are two things that you can't have one without the other. And so by doing this, it just engineers that feeling of working together and good feeling and the fact that we're all in it together. And actually, as you say, also touring company. The idea that you are sharing the same touring experience of, oh my God, the only good restaurant that we've got to go to in Sunderland is, and you find that everyone is there after a show, that sort of thing.
Or you travel to Hull, you're touring to Hull, and you never move off that one street from the stage door. There's the Old English Gentleman pub, the stage door, and then there's the dirty, greasy cafe up the road, and that's it. That's your road for the week.
Absolutely.
How did the Jet Parker happen?
So after the Royal Northern, when I fell into ballet, I fell into it through what used to be called the BBC Performing Arts Fellowship. And that was run jointly between Birmingham Royal Ballet and Rombe Dance Company. And it was quite interesting because the BBC Performing Arts Fund that funded the fellowship used to be a pot topped up by people calling up to Strictly and on those premium phone lines. And then they created that pot of money to fund the performing arts. How good is that? Do you ever play that in the ballet class?
I love it.
What exercise do you use that for?
Jumps.
Jumps, little petit sautés, or a little petit allegro occasionally for a jeté or a quick tendu. The first time I played it was somebody up in the north. It was at Northern. It was a guest teacher. And she just, whatever the correct she was giving, she says, "It's not Strictly Come Dancing." I was like, "Yes, it is." And in we went, and she looked at me and she said, "Not amusing."
We've almost got a tune for every sort of quip, haven't we?
You've got to.
Do you?
I try.
Yeah.
Oh, go on. What else? What else do you have?
I play Faulty Towers if it's falling apart a bit.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Oh, yeah, when they're sort of wobbling around
I only had
in a
brain.
balance. Oh, yeah, when it all
it's
goes,
a good one.
When it all goes wrong. Yeah. Baby elephant walk every now and then.
So you go to the da-dum, da-dum,
Oh yeah, blind date
da-dum,
theme tune. If there's a
da-dum.
couple who've just started dating, you try and get that in. If there's a
fantastic.
small person, it's obviously unfair to play the Oompa Loompas from
Oompa Loompas,
Willy
yeah.
Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
All sorts.
Oh, you've just given me an entirely new set of ideas for my mid-year review with the Australian Ballet pianists. I'm going to get that list off you and get them to tick them all
Literally,
off.
if you put your musical standards in the gutter and then take it down 20%, that's where you need to be, and that's where I am. So I'll see you down there, and we can exchange repertoire choices.
That's the thing. Why is that in the gutter?
I think it's
fantastic
brilliant.
fun. Yeah.
And I mean, just going on to the back, so we'll get back to your Jet Parker in a second, but I think that dancers are doing class 6 times a week. And it's medicinal and it's functional and it's to prepare them for the day, certainly at company level. So I don't know if somebody else is going to say play the Jurassic Park theme tune going into Men Behaving Badly, but I can give it a damn good go. And I think 50% of the room will know what it is, and it's fun music and it's catchy, so it will get somebody's attention somewhere.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think I love hearing a sing along in the studio in
definitely,
class in the
yeah.
morning, and you're like, "Yep, this is going to be a good day."
Yeah.
No, so to the Jet Parker, it was so after the fellowship, which gave me all of the introduction, and I'm so grateful to what particularly BRB did for my career, and also Rombe and the 2 mentors that I had in those in actually more than 2 mentors, the very many mentors that I had along the way, because they opened my eyes to the world of ballet, but they also gave me the right attitude to approach it, which I think was so good. And after that, it was, okay, so I want to keep doing it. And I was lucky enough that both companies kept calling me. But of course, I'm in the UK and I want to be exposed to other companies. And with the Birmingham Royal Ballet repertoire that is so close to what the Royal Ballet does, the Jetta Parker was just the natural thing to go for and the next step. So yeah, I'm also very grateful that I went into the Jetta Parker already having had the experience. And so they were able to actually give me opportunities, which, you know, I think it was 2016 when I did my first thing there, within the Golden Hour and Flight Pattern, Crystal Pipe.
Can you remember, what was that feeling, the first performance that you conducted on that podium over the bridge? Yeah. Can you remember, was it excitement, jubilation, trepidation, you know, a mixture of all of the above and more?
It's not actually excitement, of course. Jubilation, definitely not. I don't mind admitting to this. It's the one time in my career ever, and to this day still, the only time when I stood outside the pit door before opening night of my debut at the Royal Opera House, and I thought, if the show got cancelled now, I'll be very happy. It was the one time, and I was so like, it felt like it meant so much. And of course, it's false. It's the weight that you put on yourself. But yeah, I think, but also it's maybe it's quite a uniquely ballet thing, because people, of course, hold up the Royal Ballet in this country in particular as the pinnacle. Yeah. And when you get to conduct there, it feels like a pinnacle, and it is. But other places mean just as much, and your job is just as important in other places. Of course. So but I think it was interesting because it gave me just that one moment. I think about that moment often, and I think back and go, just don't put too much stock on a particular occasion or a particular place, because it's important in everywhere else. You have to do a good job everywhere else. And I sort of, that moment informed me to slap myself in the wrist, or sometimes almost, to go to assign different weighting to different gigs.
The path to the orchestra pit at the Opera House, you know, this narrow corridor and so many doors, it does make you feel slightly nervous, no? And then see the auditorium from pit side, and it's all red color. Yeah. It does make you feel a little bit,
It does and it doesn't. But I think, do you know what's interesting? The one performer in the entire show that faces away from the audience is the conductor. And so every time you go on the pit, particularly when you're performing, you go on and you see the same colleagues, well, not always, you see the orchestra, you see the dancers, you see a familiar sight, and you see, you see colleagues and you see a family. And so I have so much admiration for those dancers who stand on there and then having to look at this audience and stare them in the face and spot and turn and all that sort of stuff. That are rather them than me. I'm sure the audience would feel that way too, rather them than me.
Oh no, the audience messaged me and said that they would love to see you all the time.
They don't.
It's cool. Right, so after the Jetta Parker, you eventually took up music directorship of Northern Ballet, didn't you? Was that your first sort of music directorship role as in a ballet company?
It was, and it was very soon after the Jetta Parker. Yeah. I think I was barely 30 when I took that gig on.
You're a year younger than I am, and then I think Northern were on tour with somebody. I played for them. They were, I can't remember, Richmond or somewhere like that. And I went for a pint with somebody. They said, "Oh, we've got a new music director starting next season. Who is it? Johnny Lowe." I was like, "Oh, who's that?" He said, "Well, he's a youngster. He's even younger than you are." I said, "Oh, wow, this guy knows his stuff."
Well, I wouldn't. That's very kind of you to say. I'm not. We're all learning on the job, aren't we?
But that's the exciting thing of being an artist, isn't it? And doing this sort of work is, like we said, every day is different, but you were always learning something new.
I was, and I was I am incredibly grateful that my first job was with Northern Ballet and with David Nixon as the director. I have a habit of only working for directors who are called David, apart from Kevin. Maybe that's his middle name.
If not, maybe he should change it. We'll write to Kevin and say, "Will you change your name, please, love?"
Well, if he does it, then he have to give me a job again. I think, David Nixon was fantastic because he was very uncompromising. Yeah. And he was very uncompromising, as I'm sure you know, when it comes to music. And he had very high expectation of his artists and his musicians included. And so he sort of instills certain values of what is that the music it can't just be like this and then we dance to it.
Yeah.
We have to have that dialogue. And I love that passion about him. And I think that also translated into a lot of other things when it comes to running the orchestra and the admin side of things and dealing with other departments. And with it being a touring company that also did so many new works, but also the classics.
Yeah.
It was a great place to learn, but also to really try out your sort of artistic temperament and your artistic experiments, if you like, because you do so many shows.
Yeah. You've got 8 shows a week, 9 shows a week of Hamlet or something like that.
Yeah.
And you can.
I mean, like,
it's fun.
I remember doing, actually straight out of COVID, we did about 20 shows of Swan Lake.
David Swan Lake.
Yeah. David Swan Lake, which is this love triangle between, it's an interpretation.
It's the one I've told about.
me,
The love triangle between 2 men and a woman, and it's
And it starts with all the bikes, and actually it has some interesting music included in it too. The second act starts with the second movement of Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony. And when do you get to do Tchaik 5's second movement 7 times in a row?
and we're still sounding amazing with such reduced forces.
Yeah, it's incredible actually how that orchestra really punches above its weight, and of course with what's happening with the company and the music there and all of that. And actually, it's really difficult, the state of the country, and what Federico and David Collins, their new CEO, what they have to deal with is incredible. It's incredible, and actually, it takes a lot of courage to have to do what they do. Of course, it's going to be a painful cut, and the experience won't be the same. But I believe and I hope that there is a lot of passion around both from within the company, but also outside the company from the audience perspective, to say, yes, it's going to be a period where we're going to tighten our belt, but you have to have the orchestra back.
Yeah.
And I'm in no doubt that the company needs it, and they know it too.
Because I think, was it Berlin Phil who had a photograph taken with virtually all of the Berlin Phil wearing the Support Northern Ballet Orchestra t-shirts?
Wow.
That came up on social media or something, or Slipped Disc or one of those websites. I was like, that's fantastic.
It's incredible the support that we've had from all around the world in supporting the campaign. And also, opening night of Romeo and Juliet Sadler's-Wells, I was there.
Yeah.
And I read the reviews the day after, and it's quite nice to read reviews when you're not actually involved. And they were glowing about the campaign. They were so passionate about the campaign. And I think sometimes it does take you losing something to realize how important that it is.
Yeah.
And this may be that moment.
I hope so. Fingers crossed. It's a company I feel so close. It's so close to my heart. It's the company where I learned my craft.
Yeah. And it's the company where so many great practitioners, musicians who work in ballet learned their craft.
Yeah.
Gavin was there.
Gavin was there. Grant Green did a decent period. Grant Green, pianist at the Opera House. He was there.
Yeah, Nigel Gaynor, who's now music director at Queensland Ballet.
Queensland, that's it, yeah.
Yeah. Our number one, our head of music in Australia. All these, precisely because of the challenge the job gave all of us, I think. Because you come to somewhere like here or Birmingham, and you have a vague sense of what the repertoire is going to be because they have to do those British classics. But at Northern, you have to do all the classics. You have to do it well, but as well as all the contemporary things, the Philip Feeney's. And you look at that score thinking, okay, which bit am I going to play out of these 3 stages that Feeney somehow manages to play and fit in and also sing and talk to you at the same time. The genius of that man.
He's a talented bar steward, isn't he? I love the guys of it, but his music, I love it. I only did his Hamlet back in the day, but it was the best challenge, and it was one of the most satisfying reductions when I eventually got my fingers around it, because it was just brilliant music.
Exactly that. And it's that point that you invest your time into getting your fingers around it. Because so many companies, so many pianists as well as companies would just look at a score and say it's unplayable. So we're not going to do it. But at Northern, I feel like certainly that was the case with my time there, and it sounds like your experience too. Nobody ever said this is not playable. They just go, we'll try it.
Yeah. And they're so used to it.
Didn't Feeney say on his episode, well, such a body played it?
Some woman was doing his Dracula.
Oh, yeah.
And they got the score sent over, and they got in contact and said, this is unplayable. And I emailed them back and said, well, Northern did it, exclamation mark. But I mean, and Feeney as well, he's orchestrating for that orchestra, isn't he? He knows that orchestra. He's worked with them for about 40 years on and off.
Yeah.
So he knows that band so intimately, and he knows how to make his music sound perfect for that orchestra.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting orchestration too. It's basically the London Sinfonietta. You've got a bit of everything color, but it's not a sound that lends itself that easily to a dry pit. Like somewhere, deep down in the dungeon, but like Norwich, for example, when you're so covered and everything. So for them to get such great results, it's a real skill on the part of the musicians, not just in terms of skill playing in ballet and all of that, but to maintain that level of excellence and that level of immediacy and giving the audience that sense of power and emotion night after night when you are the only double bassist.
Yes.
To carry the harmony all the way through. It's amazing.
They really do earn their fees, don't they, that orchestra?
Yeah, they really do.
And they do it with good grace.
Yeah, and good humor.
Yeah.
And this idea, again, of touring company, of us, okay, we all go we have a good Saturday, double show day. Actually, no, Saturday is not good because everybody goes home. It's Thursday, double show day.
Thursdays was a good drinking evening on Thursdays.
Yes, thirsty Thursday.
I once got lost in Norwich trying to find my digs after a drinking session in the evening. It took me about 2 hours to get home. It was in the days before iPhones. I was on a ring road somewhere. I think. So I had to get
Chris remembers every theatre in combination of the name of the pub in each town.
Really?
Norwich was good because there was a landlord around the corner who would allow us to pre-pay for our interval drinks so we could leg it out. This was in the olden days when you could have a drink at work. And we would leg it out at the interval, and we'd have a quick pint at the interval and get it back. But we'd get there, because we'd leg it out. So the punters were still in the theatre and it was ready to go. And then it was already paid. I was like, thanks very much. We'll see you later.
Oh, fantastic. Things you learn on these podcasts. Skills.
Things I'm learning as well.
We've been friends for years. Right, sorry, back to the topic. This is not the drinking piano podcast, is it? That's going to come later. So after Northern, was it the work opportunities that came next, or did you decide the world is a little bit bigger than the UK and I want to go and explore? How did the next step happen?
Yeah, actually, I think the two steps happen side by side, really. Getting the job at Northern and I am, again, grateful to the company that they allow me the time to go and do things here, there, and everywhere. So when I got the job at Northern, the connection with BRB never stopped. The connection with the Royal Ballet never stopped. And then other things like Dutch Nationals, Scottish, South Africa, they started to materialize. And I was able to take them all on because Northern, they gave me the space to do it. Yeah. And so when it was great to be able to do all of that. So on a Thursday, you'd be doing Feeney's Cinderella, and on the Friday you'd be shooting up to do a Cinderella up in Scotland or something. And it's great. It kept it varied. And I know I was very lucky to be in that position that to have a job that allows me that. And likewise with the Australian Ballet now, to an extent, that they allow me to come out here and do things everywhere else in the world.
But I think organisations now are sort of aware that people have got, we need variety in our lives as artists and as musicians, and the same as dancers do as well, don't you? Like, principals can go and guest in many different countries and in many different companies, and you bring something from that experience into your work, at Australia or at Northern or wherever you happen to be. You learn new skills and things like that, and it just bring back a different outlook or excitement sometimes.
Yes. I think it's that outlook, and that working with different companies gives you the outlook and experience of different companies. That goes without saying, but seeing how things work in different places, in terms of how they treat the arts, in terms of how the audience reacts, what they react to. So, for example, I found it really interesting that when ENB did Carmen here, Johan Inger's Carmen, and when we did it in Australia, and how it was received differently, depending on the city, depending on what's happening around the world at the moment. And it gives that outlook that then informs, particularly with those of us lucky enough to be in music director positions, when it comes to planning for the future, not just for the company, but in terms of thinking about what the art form is going to be, what it's going to take. So, for example, I will go back to Australia and people will go, oh, so how's it going in the UK? It must be amazing. The Royal Ballet and all that sort of stuff. And then you go to them, actually, Northern Ballet is about to not have an orchestra for a little while. And people hear about that and go, okay, so how did you get to that point? And we as artists that visit companies around the world can really have a part in helping those fusions and helping those dialogues.
It's just, I'm just listening to you, and I think everything that you say is so true. I sound like I'm proper fangirling over you now, but it's true. It's so nice to hear somebody say these things, out loud to us as well, because we have these private discussions sometimes between us or on voice notes and things like that. But I think we're all saying in our own way what everybody is thinking as well, aren't we, about the arts and about how we need to, like you said, we need to fight for things because otherwise we're going to lose them.
And someone like you at the top, sort of echoing what we say. Yeah.
But I think this is the beauty of being a musician in the ballet, is that, I mean, it's very kind of you to say top and that there's a relative, height and hierarchy. But actually, we as ballet, a small digression as an example. So when you go and do a conducting competition for symphony orchestras, you can spot the conductors at the airport a mile away. Because they'll all be sitting in the corner with their glass of wine or probably like coffee, depending on the time of day, and just talking about music. This is my Brahms, and this is how I do this corner. And whereas for ballet, for us musicians, conductors, pianists, orchestra, there's a feeling that we're all in it together. And there's a feeling that if I can wave at you at the orchestra all I like, but if you don't go with what I'm showing, it will be me who ends up doing a really bad job for the stage, and likewise. And the orchestra, if you don't have a conductor that they can really trust, they can help the dancers and make it sound good. So we are all in the ballet world as musicians. We're all saying these things about fighting for art, fighting for live music. I'm just surprised that that we're not shouting about it more, actually.
Yeah.
But I think maybe because there's so much going on around the world at the moment. Yeah. And I think it's hard enough for classical music to enter into the general discourse of the public, but it's even harder when it's classical music in ballet, because how middle class does that sound? Classical music and ballet.
Sounds like it should be my hobby, doesn't it? Middle class hobby.
Well, exactly. And so to convince governments, convince people to give money to these very, on the surface, very middle class sounding things, it takes a lot.
I was having lunch with somebody last week, and we were talking about this, the new London City Ballet, or the reformed London City Ballet, and we were saying, we'll go and see them when we're at Sadler's, and that struck a chord then, because I suddenly, just without thinking, I just said, because if we don't, they're going to go again, and it just came out.
Yes, and I say the same thing to the situation in Northern Ballet. I was talking to those ballettomes that you see particularly around in London, and it's great to have a chat with them, and they're all so sweet and also wonderful to say, Northern Ballet, it won't be the same without the orchestra. Of course it won't be the same without the orchestra. And you go, I don't think I'm going to go. And at that point I say to them, that's exactly when you need to go.
That's when you need to go and become a friend and donate the extra tenner or something if you can afford to.
Exactly. And it could become so emotive for us, and it is. It's heartbreaking for me in some of those darker hours to go, oh my God, am I the music director that switched the lights off for this company? Am I the last music director? And then you go, no, actually, this, and it becomes really emotive because you're seeing your colleagues, your friends who then struggle for jobs and stuff. Of course it is. But and so it's very easy to direct that negative emotions to the company. But we have to continue to support the company if we want the Northern Ballet Sinfonia back.
Yes, definitely. So that, listeners, do it. Do the instructions from J-Lo. Get off the block and that's such an awful.
Do you ever do that song in ballet class? Jenny from the block?
I don't actually.
No.
Oh, there you go.
Do you?
Do you know what? I would love to be able to play for ballet class. There was a time during lockdown when I was, my then girlfriend, now wife, we were locked down together, and it was interesting actually thinking back on those days and how suddenly everybody goes, oh, ballet class, music. Yeah. What do we do? And the innovation that actually I think music played in driving innovations in tech. The Zoom original sound for musicians. It was just called original sound when it first came out. And it's now original sound for musicians. Yeah. And I feel like actually in people trying to make music across across the geographical space, had a lot of to go, oh my God, that's something we really miss. We miss having someone make music for us.
Yeah.
I like some of the Zoom videos where there was something like 60 small separate screens from choirs, things like that. I found those almost more sort of emotional actually than some of the orchestra ones that I saw.
In lockdown, I played company class for Tulsa Ballet from my home in London.
Amazing.
I think it was my afternoon, their morning.
Oh, it's a good gig for you, isn't it?
Yeah, it was crazy. Like early on in the lockdown.
I think maybe all ballet class should be played across a time difference.
But the only thing we noticed in lockdown was it was so difficult to accompany you couldn't accompany a ballet class because of the slight screen delays. Like, because I was at the school at the time, so we had kids. We'd do an Asian class in the morning, we'd do a Central European class at lunchtime, and then our evening we'd do for the kids over in
States,
America.
yeah. Goodness.
And some of the delays on the Zoom and things like that, and people cutting in and out, were hilarious.
And that was, but not to forget that was actually relatively late on, because there was a whole period of a few months when people just didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
No, we were on it early. I was on it because I finished work, because I'm diabetic, so I was classed as high risk because no one knew what COVID was at the time. So I finished a couple of weeks early. So when the school was still in, albeit cautiously, back in 2020, I was at home, so I was already Zooming and musicking when people were still technically in the studio. So I think the kids got sent home on a Monday, and later on that week we lost about 3 days of classes with live music, and that was it. And then so the kids actually, that was the only good thing, I think.
Wow, well done.
Or one of the good things that we managed to do for them in that time musically.
What we did, well, I say we, what Laura had to do with Birmingham Royal Ballet, is that they actually asked her, and I feel like, oh, they asked you. I mean, I didn't mean that offensively. I was like, they didn't ask anyone, but okay, it's you. But I wonder whether the fact that she could then have me in tow, and so they created these videos where one of the ballet staff was teaching class, but teaching the exercise, and then Laura would then do it with me playing the piano.
Okay.
Oh my God, I've never been that stressed in my life. I think I'd gone through so many t-shirts because of this sweat from the armpit and playing it. And then we would record it. We'd do a take, and she'd be like, "That was great. I look amazing in it." I was like, "But I played a wrong note."
I sound awful. Yeah.
Oh God, yes.
But that's the thing with recording, isn't it? Because when you're playing a ballet class, I don't think I ever play a ballet class where every note is 100% perfect.
No.
There's a slip up sometimes somewhere here and there. But it sort of doesn't matter in that respect, because it's been and it's gone. And as long as it's not an absolute clanger, I notice it, but I don't think anybody else really notices it.
Yeah, but then, like you say, because it was recorded and sent to everybody, and you're just like, oh no. And then some of the music they asked was so specific as well. The Polonaise, that Chopin Polonaise. I can still feel that dread when I.
But then what you do is
play
you
it.
only do the first 8 or 16 bars, then send it into the ET theme tune, and then into the Jurassic Park theme tune as a Polonaise.
You make me sound like I actually know what I'm doing.
It's just glue a load of TV theme tunes together with the wrong rhythm. It's great fun.
Polonaise is a good one, isn't it? Because it's got such a character to it, but you can muscle so much into that.
What's your favourite Polonaise, Matt, for class? Do you have one, or do you just?
Oh, I don't know. I improvise a lot of them.
Yeah. We could ask Akiko what hers was, but she's left us, by the way. She had to go play a rehearsal of Paquita, so Akiko's left us.
What is, just out of interest, so small digression, right? What is a piece of music that you go, I would love to do this, but I've never been able to put into a class?
What don't I? I've never put Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto, just the main theme, into there, because I don't want to cut it in that way, because I've never found a way to cut the music that I find convincing.
Yes.
Because it's that, I think when I'm trying to arrange stuff or come up with my own little arrangements of things, I want it to be like, if the person knows the tune, they don't notice that I've removed the odd half a phrase, or that I've missed out a couple of bars rest to make it fit. And if I notice that and I feel uncomfortable playing and it makes me feel, I get the shakes a little bit, I don't like it, and I get that with that Rachmaninoff.
I think that's where we say we put the line, don't we, when we're putting tunes in and we have to butcher them. It's still got to sound like it where people don't notice it's being butchered.
If it's a sing-along tune, people can find themselves singing along even though it's wrong.
Or it's a different time signature or something, they can still sing it.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I find that part really hard, like you've got a friend in me, you always go, this would work great, but then you get to that 2/4 bar and you're like, no, what do I do now?
I don't know. I've got that, because I do play that, but I don't know I've never had that with that. I just sort of swept over that 2/4 section somehow. And I think I cut out about 1.5 bars and then do a really rubbish ending on it. It's just a really, really crappy ending of it.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Playing for ballet class is such I feel like more ballet conductors should learn to play it. And there's a reason why so many fantastic ballet conductors started out as pianists, because it gives you such an understanding of what it means to make music for dance.
And then you're in it from the start of the day then, aren't you, as well? Because you're there when the dancers are warming up, you're going through it, and it's giving you the knowledge, I suppose, in your fingers of watching, certain dancers doing jumps or whatever, and you get to learn how the dancers move, and then that must inform then how you accompany them with the orchestra.
Yeah, 100%. And I think what that is, it's informing actually the musician that it's never just about tempo. Because when you're playing ballet class, tempo is a thing, but when you find the feeling, the phrasing, the accents and all of those things, then actually it works. There's no point putting a metronome mark to, because nobody ever does ballet class for a metronome.
Exactly. And the micro adjustments that you make from between groups and groups, or whether it's a group of men and then it's a group of ladies, and things like, just the micro adjustments that you make, or you've got some really tall ladies and you've got a group of shorter ones, and things and how you deal with that as an accompanist is actually something that we've never really spoken about, I don't think, or not in great detail. But that's about it, isn't it? It's just learning how to do it.
There you go. There's your next episode.
There we go.
But I think it's the fact that I think that's what make the performing arts such an important part of it, is that it is living and breathing. Try doing any ballet to a click track. It actually changes completely how you conduct something.
Yeah.
And you suddenly realize that all the natural feeling of breath, of musicality, for lack of a better word, the sort of push and pull, you can't do it.
Yeah.
Because the click doesn't allow you to do it. I think it's interesting. I remember doing Dante here last year. The entirety of the third act has to be matched up with the video projection.
Right.
I think it's 20 odd minutes. I don't remember how to split, half an hour of it. All of it, Tom Ades, the composer, I'm not doing it to click. And so every section, you'd have a time code. You have a clock on the stand. You have a time code. And then you have to you're conducting, you're making music, you look at the code and you look at the clock and you go, am I behind? Am I? And then you have to go through all this mental arithmetic going on and go, if I'm behind, how do I catch up? But what was interesting about that is that there's this mechanical thing when you have to sync something up with your music making, but you are allowing that freedom of push and pull, of chasing, of giving time
within the beats.
And that was great. And actually, then that provided me with a really useful set of skills when my click track in Zurich recently dropped out halfway through.
Oh no!
And we were playing this last movement, the epilogue to Kathy Marsden's ballet Atonement, where we have to make the music and it has to sync up with a played over the music interview. And the click track stopped. What do? You keep going, you keep conducting. But the worst thing was the click track came back on about a couple of pages later. And then in the end, I just whipped the click track off and went, you know what, I'm going to use my Dante experience of going, matching up with things. I mean, in the end, I think we stayed within a gnat's crotchet of the thing, or whatever you call it in that podcast. But so I think it's the living and breathing of it, and allowing all parts of the art form to live and breathe. That's why live music is important. But I know I'm preaching to the converted.
So what's next for you? What's next for Johnny Lowe?
So I've got one more show of Atonement on Friday in Zurich. The shows are so sparsely spaced in Europe. It's incredible. Between opening night and the show after opening night, there was a full 14 days when I was able to go to Sydney and come back and do the next show. In between, the orchestra had done the ring cycle, literally.
Whoa.
Jeez.
I was like, this will be my 10th performance of Atonement in the space of a month and a half, which is great. But also because it gives the company the time to mold it. So the show that you see now is pretty much entirely different in terms of the nuances to the opening night. So we got that. And then when I go back to Australia, it will be Jules. In Adelaide, and then followed by the world premiere of Christopher Wilden's Oscar, a ballet on the story of Oscar Wilde.
Yes, he's making that ballet.
Music by Joby Tolbert. It's going to be a great work.
Oh, fantastic!
The bit of music that I heard and the bit of stuff that I've seen in the studio is going to be amazing.
Wow, that's so exciting. That's wicked. Right, listen, listeners and viewers, if you want to, you can connect with Mr. Jonathan Lowe on Instagram, who is JLo Conductor. Is that right?
Yeah.
And Johnny, we'd like to thank you so much for giving up your hour and spending time. It's been great to chat to you. Thank you so
pleasure.
much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.